Welcome back, listeners. Today we're going really deep into the world of Bob Camblin.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about an artist that many have called enigmatic, maybe even reclusive.
Yeah, and we've got like a treasure trove of material to look through. We've got his quotes.
Yeah.
We've got this really interesting YouTube video analysis that we found
No.
that goes into one of his drawings.
Okay.
And there are some books out there about his art, his philosophy, a
Yeah.
full biography, and even some people who knew him have given some interesting insights.
It sounds like we're going to get a very full picture.
Yeah, and I think our goal, our mission, if you will,
Okay.
is not to just describe what his art is, but to really get to
Him, yeah.
what he was trying to say. And I mean, why is he called enigmatic? Why does he
Yeah.
confuse people so much? So we're going to start with this YouTube video.
Okay.
It's a video analysis of his piece called Beginnings Unbound, A Child's Gaze at Infinity.
Catchy title.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty wild piece, so they need
No,
a good
it's-
title, right?
Fair enough.
So let me describe it a little bit.
Yeah.
You've got this little, almost BAL-like child,
Okay.
and they're standing on this tiled ground. There's just all these symbols everywhere, geometric shapes, kind of almost like preliminary sketches everywhere.
Interesting.
Yeah, and in the background, there's this chain link fence,
Mm.
and the child is looking upwards towards it.
At the fence.
At the fence, yeah. So one of the things the video points out is this elevated viewpoint.
Okay.
Like, Camblin is making us look down at this child.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and it creates this, it emphasizes how small this child is
Interesting.
compared to this really intricate world that he's put him in.
Okay.
And then there's this upward gaze,
Right.
and it makes you feel like the kid is yearning for something,
Yeah.
reaching for something beyond.
Yeah, I definitely get a sense of that.
Yeah, so what do you make of that initial, what you're seeing?
Well, the child being so small against all those symbols makes me wonder, like you said, what they're trying to understand about the world.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that moment when you first encounter something new and you just don't know where to begin.
Well, it's interesting you say that because the video actually brings up
Oh.
Shoshin, which is from Zen Buddhism. It means like beginner's mind.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. And so, like, you approach everything with an open mind, without
Right, without preconceptions.
And, when you're tackling something new or maybe something that you're really familiar with,
Yeah.
do you ever think about taking that approach, like trying to look at it with,
Sure. Yeah. Sometimes it's helpful to take a step back and approach things with a fresh perspective.
yeah,
Especially with something you've been working on for a long time, it can be easy to get stuck in a rut.
right. And, one of the things that the video points out, too, is this chain link fence.
Oh, okay.
And they talk about it being this really powerful symbol of the mental barriers that we create for ourselves,
I see.
that can actually, hinder our understanding,
Like we're holding ourselves back.
holding ourselves back from enlightenment, even from
Right.
true understanding of things.
Hmm.
And they make this really interesting connection that the child's simplicity is like a key
Hmm.
to this boundless understanding because he hasn't built up those mental walls yet.
Like he's free from those limitations.
Exactly.
That's a very powerful metaphor, the fence. It's something we can all relate to in a way.
Yeah, we all put up those fences, and the video even goes on to talk about, how we put up fences even in our approach to art.
Oh, interesting.
We limit ourselves based on what we think we like or what we think we should like, rather than just experiencing it with an open mind.
So in a way, the fence isn't just a barrier to understanding the world, but also to experiencing and appreciating art.
Exactly. And Camblin, I think, was really trying to break down those fences with his art, to make us look at things in a whole new way. So going back to the drawing,
Yeah.
the tiled ground is also something that the video really focuses on.
Uh-huh.
All those symbols and designs.
Right.
And they're not just random decorations. They talk about them as possibly being, the mental distractions
Okay.
and clutter that we all have in our heads.
I like that.
Yeah. And the child's stillness and curiosity
Right.
become a way to kind of cut through the noise.
To rise above it all.
Yeah, to see what's really important.
It makes me think about mindfulness and meditation, how we can train ourselves to quiet the mind and focus on the present moment.
And they actually take it a step further and connect this whole image
Okay.
to the I Ching.
Wow.
So specifically hexagram number 3,
Okay.
which is often translated as difficulty at the beginning.
That sounds appropriate.
And this hexagram really emphasizes the challenges that we face
Mm-hmm.
when we start out on something new.
Okay.
The need for perseverance
Yeah.
and really nurturing your own potential.
I can see how that relates to the child in the drawing.
Right.
Like he's at the very beginning of his journey facing all these possibilities and obstacles.
Exactly. So, like, all those symbols on the ground could be seen as those untrodden paths.
Right.
And then you have the child who's just this pure, raw, untapped energy.
Pure potential.
Yeah, just starting out.
And the fence is like all the hurdles, both the external ones and the ones we put up for ourselves.
Exactly. So if you ever, think back to when you were first starting out with something, was there...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, any new project or skill, there's always that initial uncertainty, that feeling of not knowing where to start or what to expect.
And I think that's what Camblin is capturing so beautifully here.
It's a universal experience,
Yeah.
and he's managed to capture it in this one image.
And, the video makes this really cool point
Yeah.
by connecting this whole image to other works that he's done.
Really?
Yeah, like Texas
Okay.
and Still Life 2.
Which I'm not as familiar with those.
Yeah, so those pieces also feature this interplay between things that seem opposite,
Oh,
like innocence and chaos,
interesting.
freedom and entrapment.
That sounds like it would create a lot of tension.
Yeah, and so the video points out that this duality
Oh, duality.
is like a recurring theme.
Oh, so it's not just a one-off thing.
No, it's something he returns to again and again in his work.
It makes me wonder if he's trying to explore the complexities of human experience. You know how we're constantly caught between these opposing forces?
Exactly.
It's like life is full of contradictions, and Camblin isn't afraid to show that in his art.
And, the child being the focus
Right.
of this really complex scene really highlights that tension.
It makes you think about your own position in that balance, between simplicity and complexity, freedom and constraint.
Right. It's almost like we're all navigating our own tiled ground with our own fences in the background.
I love that analogy.
And the video goes even deeper and talks about the child as like embodying this human condition.
How so?
This kind of pull between our curiosity about the world
Uh-huh.
and all the structures and systems that we have to navigate.
It's like that age-old tension between the individual and society.
Yeah. And then all those symbols
Right.
could be seen as the narratives that we create.
Okay.
The stories we tell ourselves to try to make sense of everything.
Oh, like we're trying to impose order on chaos.
Exactly. And that upward gaze
Right.
becomes this even more significant thing.
Right, he's looking beyond those structures, beyond those narratives.
Yeah, he's searching for something, like a truth that goes beyond all those constructs.
And it's interesting how the video ties that back to creative philosophy.
Right.
Like the idea of stripping away all the distractions to get to the core of something.
The essence
Yeah.
and the child in its pure, raw state,
Like a blank slate.
becomes this powerful symbol of unadulterated creativity and potential.
Before the world has had a chance to mold him.
Exactly. So I think that's a pretty powerful image to kick off this exploration of Bob Camblin.
Absolutely. I'm already intrigued.
Yeah, so let's shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and go right to the source, to Camblin's own words.
Okay. His own words.
Yeah, and one of the things that really jumps out at me is this theme of impermanence.
Oh, interesting.
He's got this quote, "Fortunately, some things remain forever, or another 10 years perhaps."
Wow, that's really powerful. It's like even the things that seem permanent are subject to change.
Yeah, it's a real reminder to appreciate
Yeah.
the present moment.
To not take anything for granted.
Yeah, and even in a more specific quote, talking about Salt Air Summer 1967,
Mm-hmm.
he talks about how the memory of songs and music faded, but the tangible signs of decay were more prominent.
That's poignant. It's like time passing and changing our perception of things.
Yeah, and how our memories are shaped by the present.
It makes you think about how your own memories might be colored by what's happening in your life right now.
Yeah, and then we have this really intriguing quote, "Look into the atom, you get what you need. Look into magic, and you get what you need. Philosophy and art are in both."
Okay, that's a lot to unpack.
It is, but it seems to be saying that there's this deep connection between,
Between things that we usually think of as separate.
yeah, like science and magic.
That's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, so like he's not afraid to bridge those worlds.
To see the value in both the rational and the irrational.
Right.
Wonder if that's what makes him so enigmatic, that he's willing to embrace these seemingly contradictory ideas.
And he even talks about this idea of sticking with common sense.
Common sense.
Yeah, and trying to find the perfectly average view of the universe.
The perfectly average.
Yeah, like not getting too caught up in extremes,
Mhm.
but finding the beauty and the miracles in the ordinary.
So not the extremes of science or magic, but somewhere in between.
Yeah, like finding the extraordinary within the ordinary.
That's a unique perspective.
And he goes on to talk about the sixth sense is to be without a doubt, senza dubio, no doubt.
He seems to be placing a lot of emphasis on intuition and conviction.
Yeah, and it reminds me of that beginner's mind we were talking about earlier.
Right. Approaching things with a sense of trust in your own perception.
Without a doubt, yeah.
It makes me think about how much we rely on external validation versus trusting our own gut feelings.
And then there's this beautiful quote that just kind of tugs at your heartstrings. Bright day and I soar, how cruel that my soul is attached to this earth and yet.
It's like that feeling of wanting to transcend your limitations, but being tethered to the physical world.
Yeah, this tension between our aspirations and reality.
It's something we can all relate to, that yearning for something more.
And then he says, I cannot tell a lie to myself for very long. And he advises to find something in nature that completes you and then surrender to it.
He seems to be emphasizing authenticity and a deep connection to the natural world.
Yeah, and this idea of surrendering to nature is really interesting. It's like letting go of your ego.
And trusting in something larger than yourself.
Yeah, and finding that point of harmony with the natural world.
It makes me think about my own relationship with nature. What aspects of it really resonate with me and make me feel whole.
And, he also talks about the power of light, the goal of evolution through effort, and the role of amplification in belief.
So it's not just about being passive, but actively working towards something.
Yeah, and using your belief as a tool to amplify your efforts.
Like focusing your energy and attention.
Exactly.
Makes me think about what I truly believe in and how that drives my actions.
And then he says, balance, patience, and freedom are all found in silence.
He seems to be placing a lot of value on introspection and quieting the mind.
Yeah, and finding that inner peace and clarity through silence.
In our busy world, silence can be a rare and precious thing.
Yeah, it makes me think about how often I actually allow myself to experience true silence.
It's something we could all probably benefit from more of.
And, his perspective on art is also really interesting. He says, art is not just images. Art for art's sake has become art for life's sake, or art for my sake, or art for survival's sake.
It's like he's saying that art is not just something separate from life, but it's essential to our existence.
Yeah, it's integrated with who we are and how we experience the world.
And maybe even necessary for our survival in a way.
Yeah, and he talks about stepping off the train of thought.
The train of thought.
Yeah, to find deeper power, to do work that is not work, and to laugh the true laugh.
So it's about transcending our usual ways of thinking.
Yeah, breaking free from those mental patterns and habits.
To access something more authentic and joyful.
And then he says, when you think, don't act. When you act, don't think.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, be fully present in either thought or action. Don't try to do both at the same time.
It makes me think about how often I'm multitasking and not really giving my full attention to anything.
And he has these really wonderful observations about everyday life.
Give me an example.
Well, he talks about this person who's discussing changing the world, but only taking out 21 cents to pay for their coffee.
That's so Camblin, finding the humor in the everyday.
Yeah, and highlighting those little contradictions in human behavior.
Like we have these grand aspirations, but our actions don't always match up.
Yeah. And then he says, the cosmos waves at me through leaves, and I feel the sun's warmth and weight in my chest and know it's true.
He's connecting the personal with the cosmic.
Yeah, and finding those universal truths in the everyday sensory experiences.
It's like he's saying everything is connected.
And then he talks about missing the clouds for a moment and regretting it, and his mind racing with variations until it reaches a still taunt.
So it's about the fleeting nature of experience and the constant movement of the mind.
Yeah, and that image of the mind as lightning trying to reach a state of calm is really powerful.
It's like we're always searching for that peace and stillness.
And he talks about rain-soaked willows and a still breeze bringing him to his senses.
Nature seems to be a grounding force for him.
Yeah. Source of wisdom and clarity.
It makes me think about how different aspects of nature affect my own mood and state of mind.
And then he says, much better than arguing is to look at my watercolor palette.
He's prioritizing observation and the visual experience over conflict.
Yeah, and maybe even saying that art itself is a form of communication that can transcend words.
It's like he's saying, why argue when we can create something beautiful together?
And then there's this really thought-provoking line. White is light, black is absence of light, but people are seen.
He's challenging our perceptions of reality and identity.
Yeah, and highlighting the subjective nature of how we see the world.
It makes me question my own assumptions about how I categorize and define things.
And then there's this almost humorous dialogue with nature. Well, that's enough about me, Mother Nature. Let's talk about you. What did you think of my last picture?
It's like he's personifying nature and engaging with it as a creative partner.
And then there's this line, 5 thoughts crashed at South Blevid and Mandel, followed by a seemingly random list of thoughts.
It's a glimpse into the chaotic nature of the mind.
Yeah, all those thoughts and ideas colliding and coexisting.
It makes me feel a little less crazy about my own random thoughts.
And then he talks about arguing with pessimists and optimists, offering different approaches for each.
It's like he's a master of communication, recognizing the need to tailor your approach based on the other person.
And then he questions, as people move away, do they diminish in our eyes, mind, or through relativity?
That's a deep one. It makes you think about how distance affects our relationships and perceptions.
And then he says, tried to not argue, but it was an argument.
It's like he's acknowledging the paradoxical nature of human behavior, how sometimes our attempts to control things backfire.
And he talks about learning versus communicating, suggesting they're distinct processes.
So communication is about more than just sharing information.
Yeah, it's about a deeper level of understanding and connection.
It makes me think about what constitutes true communication, beyond just words.
And then he uses this powerful image. Gate was open, fence was broken. Search continues with faith.
It's a metaphor for perseverance in the face of uncertainty.
Yeah, and the importance of faith, even when you're not sure where you're going.
It's about trusting the journey.
And then he says, revolution is based on misunderstanding. Evolution is based on understanding. Balance it in the mind.
So he's advocating for a more gradual, internally driven transformation.
Yeah, rather than a sudden, externally imposed change.
It makes me think about areas in my life where I might need to be more patient and focus on understanding rather than trying to force things.
And then he throws in this classic bit of wisdom. You never miss the water until the wells run dry.
A timeless reminder to appreciate what we have.
And then he captures these beautiful, fleeting moments in nature. Starlings on broken branches. Clouds circling a tower as if it were an intruder.
He's such a keen observer of the natural world.
Yeah, and he finds these deeper meanings and connections in those seemingly simple observations.
It makes me want to pay more attention to the details around me.
And he even compares humans to fish trapped by the tides.
Highlighting our shared vulnerabilities with the natural world.
Yeah, we're all part of this interconnected system.
It's a reminder of our place in the grand scheme of things.
And then he muses about reincarnation and the beauty of simple forms.
He's got such a curious and playful mind, always open to possibilities.
Yeah, and then he talks about darning needles, sewing shimmerline tapestries.
Elevating the mundane tools of creation to something magical.
Yeah, finding the poetry in the everyday.
It makes me think about the tools I use in my own creative work and how I might see them in a new light.
And he has these beautiful, almost haiku-like observations about light, color, and texture.
Like little snippets of poetry.
Yeah, revealing his deep sensitivity to the visual world.
It makes me want to slow down and really appreciate the sensory details around me.
And then there's this jarring juxtaposition. Eater of Christians, chimera Byzantium warm, cold children's share.
It's so surreal. It makes you stop and think, what does it all mean?
Yeah, forcing you to make connections and find your own interpretation.
I love how he doesn't give us all the answers. He makes us work for it.
And then he reflects on mortality with this image of a fragile, grayed lady making a hasty retreat.
It's a poignant reminder of the fleeting nature of life.
Yeah, and the beauty in that transience.
It makes me think about what I want to do with the time I have left.
And then he talks about the artist as a free agent.
Unbound by conventions and expectations.
Yeah, and he even suggests the potential for participatory art.
Where the audience becomes part of the creative process.
Yeah, it's a really forward-thinking idea.
It makes me think about how I can be more actively engaged with art rather than just passively observing it.
And he talks about religion and art as being defined by belief.
So it's about the power of belief to shape our reality.
Yeah, and how our beliefs influence our perception and understanding of the world.
And then he touches on faith, discipline, and communication, acknowledging the complex and multifaceted nature of these concepts.
And then he says art is and is not, love is and is not.
He's getting at the elusive nature of both art and love.
Yeah, and how sometimes they're best experienced rather than defined.
And then he throws in resist and submit and figure 4. It's like he's talking about the cyclical nature of life.
Yeah, this constant interplay of opposing forces.
Like we have to resist and submit, push and pull in order to find balance and move forward.
And then he says, When truth is understood, laughter is inevitable. Never try to be right, only try for the flow.
He's advocating for a more fluid and adaptable approach to life.
Yeah, letting go of the need to be right and embracing the flow of experience.
It's a reminder to not take ourselves too seriously.
And he even takes a jab at historians, saying they romanticize artistic madness.
He's demystifying the tortured artist myth.
Yeah, and suggesting that creativity doesn't have to be about suffering.
And then he says, we can train ourselves to see it can be done, highlighting our ability to consciously change our perception.
Yeah, it's about being intentional and open to new ways of seeing.
It makes me think about what steps I can take to broaden my own perspective.
And he talks about Mistim having a direct experience of knowing.
So it's not just about intellectual understanding, but a deeper, more intuitive kind of knowledge.
And then he says, history is only believable when it is creative.
What a provocative statement. It makes you think about how history is written and interpreted.
Yeah, and whose voices and perspectives are included.
And he touches on awareness, familiarity, and creativity, suggesting a progression from simply being aware of something to being familiar with it and then to transforming it through creativity.
And then he says, cynicism is destructive creativity.
It's like he's saying a constantly critical mindset can stifle innovation and positive change.
Yeah, and that true creativity involves a sense of hope and possibility.
It makes me think about how I can be more mindful of my own negativity and channel it to something more constructive.
And he says, we have lost magic in understanding everything. Not in knowing, but in understanding everything.
It's like he's saying overanalyzing things can sometimes rob them of their wonder and mystery.
Yeah, sometimes it's better to just experience things without trying to fully understand them.
And then he talks about drawing, teaching, searching, revealing, always framed in paradox, encapsulating his whole approach to art and life.
Yeah, it's all about embracing those contradictions and finding the truth in the tension between opposites.
It's a reminder that life is full of paradoxes, and that's okay.
And he advocates for returning to a naive approach to art.
Unburdened by history and critical theory.
Yeah, just experiencing it with fresh eyes and an open mind.
It makes me think about how I can approach things with a sense of childlike wonder.
And he compares critics to a legless man who teaches running.
Ouch. That's a harsh critique of those who judge without experience.
Yeah, and it reminds me of that saying, those who can't do, teach.
And he talks about the human need to make marks. It's a primal urge for expression.
Yeah, going back to our earliest ancestors in cave paintings.
It makes me think about my own need to create and how it manifests in different ways.
And then he says, intention cannot be forced, only studied. Drawing cannot be forced, only studied.
So true creativity comes from an internal drive, not from external pressure.
Yeah, and you can't force inspiration. You just have to be open to it.
It makes me think about what truly inspires me and how I can cultivate that inspiration.
And then he playfully says that artists are helping historians find Easter eggs.
He's suggesting that art can contain hidden meanings and messages that reveal themselves over time.
Yeah, and that maybe artists themselves aren't always fully aware of those meanings.
It makes me think about the art I've created and what hidden messages or insights might be embedded in it.
And he talks about the emptiness of art and the attempts to fill it.
It's like he's saying sometimes people try to overinterpret art, to find meaning where there is none.
And he makes this really bold statement, the visual arts have finally become non-visual.
What does that even mean?
I think he's suggesting that contemporary art is more about concept and idea than about visual experience.
And then he says, Zazen, the aimless mind focusing itself. A perfect encapsulation of that Zen practice.
Yeah, finding focus through letting go of specific goals.
It's a paradox that makes sense when you experience it.
And he encourages playing the art game without fear and doubt.
Embracing the creative process and letting go of self-criticism.
Yeah, and then he distinguishes between different types of drawings.
Oh, different purposes and discoveries.
Yeah, like some drawings are about observation, others are about exploring ideas.
It makes me think about how I use different creative tools for different purposes.
And he emphasizes the nonverbal aspect of both drawing and concept.
Sometimes words just get in the way.
And then he compares haiku to a pebble in a still pond.
Simple yet profound, evoking a ripple effect of meaning.
Yeah, and he talks about finding your mystic switch.
That personal trigger that opens you up to truth and insight.
And he says, learning how to see is never over.
It's a continuous process of discovery.
And he even reframes failure as essential to learning.
It's not about avoiding mistakes, but learning from them.
And then he says, I didn't learn anything new, but I know a lot more now.
It's about deepening our understanding of what we already know.
Yeah, and then he throws out this gem. We have nothing to fear but fear itself.
A timeless reminder of the power of our own minds to create our reality.
And he talks about the Zen concept of always being Buddha but forgetting it.
It's like we already have everything we need, we just need to remember.
And he uses mirrors as metaphors for our interconnectedness.
We're all reflections of each other.
Yeah, and then he talks about the jump and the fish not knowing water.
Sometimes we're so immersed in our own experience that we don't even notice the fundamental elements of our existence.
And he contrasts negative magic with positive magic.
One is about power, the other is about seeing.
And he talks about real seeing as being deceptive.
Our perceptions are limited and subjective.
And then he discusses the dilemma of technique versus novelty in art.
Balancing mastery with the pressure to create something new and original.
And he laments the popularization of potent symbols.
Like, explaining something can sometimes strip it of its mystery and power.
And he reflects on communication as being both wonderful and sad.
It can connect us and also reveal our differences.
And then he says, hope for diverse forms in art. Always.
Celebrating individuality and resisting homogenization.
And he notes the limitations of knowledge without experience.
You can't truly understand something until you've lived it.
And he observes cycles of creation and destruction in nature.
It's a constant process of change and renewal.
And he says, there are no mistakes.
Embracing experimentation and trusting your instincts.
And he reinterprets proverbs like, pride goeth before a fall.
Finding new meanings in old sayings.
And he talks about the importance of cooperation over conflict.
Working together to create something greater than we could achieve alone.
And then he says, chaos and order are one.
Recognizing the interconnectedness of these seemingly opposite forces.
And he introduces this concept of the hologram.
Like a collective understanding that emerges when we share our perspectives.
And he talks about approaching the edge of real time.
It's a little cryptic, and it makes me think about those moments in life when we feel like we're on the cusp of something significant.
And he plays with different perspectives on the universe.
He's not afraid to explore different ideas and possibilities.
And then he says, to be aware of history is to live in past, present, and future simultaneously. To dream of how it all works.
What a beautiful way of putting it. It's like our awareness connects us to all of time.
And he sees time travel as happening at the speed of enlightenment.
Like a spiritual awakening can transcend the limitations of time and space.
Then observing nature